When you record in the studio, do you usually play through an amp, or do you like to go directly into the board, or is that decision made by the producer?
That's really kind of an engineer-producer decision. But what I do is I always bring an amp, and I have a DI that I really like, and I bring them and I give them the option. I mean, I'm going to plug it all in if they want to. If they have the space for it and they want to put a mic in front of the amp, that's all the better. But I really let them make that call. My main thing is I really try to give them as clean a performance as I can, so that later on, if they want to go in and sometimes they want to grid it up later, so they can shoot it back out through speakers into an amp, or run it through the amp and record it overdriven or whatever. But the idea of giving them the cleanest possible start usually works. But I love it if they're willing to do both, because both are a little different personality, and the blending can be very nice.
I agree. You mentioned a little earlier about doing bass clinics. When you do a bass clinic, what are some of the main concepts that you try to emphasize?
You know, it's strange. I've been asked over the years to do instructional, like DVDs and stuff, and I got a bunch of them of other guys doing them, and boy, it's just not my cup of tea at all. So when I would go to do these clinics, I've only done like a half a dozen in my life, and it's really not my comfort zone. But when I've done them, there's almost no playing involved. Really, what I do is I just go in there, play a bunch of different kinds of stuff that I've worked on. I just put a little folder together on my laptop with everything from something like Stratus with Billy Cobham to It's Raining Men with the Weather Girls to Doctor My Eyes, and this whole breadth of things, and kind of show them the kind of demands that I have to experience, and then I just really open it up to questions. And I was just down in Mexico at a school called the Fermata Music Academy, and did a master class for them, and we were in there like 5 hours talking. I mean, it was pretty great, but the kind of questions I get really become the thing that feeds it. And I talk about studio etiquette and really the best way to handle yourself in the studio, and what to listen for, how to prepare for a song. The hard part now is the world of studio musician that I grew up in and spent most of my career in has kind of disappeared. I mean, there's guys going in the studio, but so much of the work now is just going to guys' houses, and you're sitting there in their bedroom with their Pro Tools rig and overdubbing. It isn't this experience of having a room with 4 to 6 to however many people are hired for that session, feeding off of each other and kicking ideas around and developing structure out of a skeleton. So it's a different time now, and I try to explain that to them. How to be prepared for this. But a lot of times I say, how many of you guys want to be a studio musician? And a lot of them don't. They just want to be in a band. They want to get chicks. They want to, whatever. I mean, their motivations are all different. So I kind of leave it up to them to tell me what they want me to talk about, and then I might play a couple of songs with them just so they can see how I play. But for the most part, I've never felt as a teacher. I always feel myself as a band guy, and I just want to go out and play. That's all I want to do. I'm the happiest when I'm doing that.
And wouldn't you say that, when you're playing an instrument like bass and you pick things out by ear, I know you have early training, reading music and everything, but that sometimes it sticks with you better and it's a better education to sort of figure it out on your own?
It runs the whole gamut. I mean, there's times where I'm thrilled to walk in and have a chart in front of me and not have to think. All I have to do is interpret. And there's so many other times where I go in and we don't have a clue what the song's like or anything until the guy starts playing it. That's the adventure of studio for me. Is you're really kind of, I sort of have a mantra that I say to myself as I'm driving to work, and it's basically, please don't suck, please don't suck. Because I don't know what I'm getting into, and there are times where you walk in, like we did. Bernie Williams, who was the center fielder for the New York Yankees, is a monstrous guitarist, composer. The guy's brilliant, and he, when he was growing up in Puerto Rico, he was a music student all through school, and sports came later to him. He was kind of a good natural athlete and was seen doing sports in Puerto Rico and ended up with this career where he ended up with 4 World Series rings and one of the great ball players for the Yankees. And I've done a lot of vanity projects over the years with actors and sports people who think that since they're good in one field, they're obviously going to be great musicians, and we all kind of go, yeah, okay, whatever. But when we showed up in the studio with Bernie and he pulled out his guitar and started playing, we all looked at each other and went, holy crap, we better get on top of our game. And because he was really great, and it was a great adventure with him.
Yeah, nice surprise for you.
Yeah, it was a fabulous surprise, and we've done 2 albums now, and I just love playing with him. But you never quite know as a studio player, like I said earlier, what you're getting into. So, you just have to stay on top of your game and show up and listen. The primary thing is listen. Yeah. Let the guy who's the composer play it for you, and they kind of dictate the direction they would like this thing to go in. And then you move into that realm and then try to make it as good as it can be, and also listen and have thoughts, have advice. If you hear something that might be cool, just throw it out there. Be involved. I always tell guys, I said, look, you're not going to hurt my feelings. I said, everything I do, as far as I'm concerned, is etched in mud. It can always fold over on itself and start fresh. It's not granite.
Etched in mud.
Yeah. So, but I like being engaged. I like being involved. If we're in the studio, I want to hear all the playbacks. I want to, be involved as best I can. So.
Wow. Well, as you mentioned, working with other studio musicians, you want to serve the artist, but there was a situation where you and Russ Kunkel and Danny Korchmar and Craig Dirge did some projects for yourself and recorded some nice instrumental albums as the section.
Yeah.
And toured with the Mahavishnu Orchestra as their opening act. Is that when you met Billy Cobham?
Yeah. We were opening for them because it was a small community. Mahavishnu was managed. One of their managers was a guy named Nat Weiss, and Nat was Peter Asher's partner. So he was involved with James. So it was kind of a tight little unit, and so through all that, we got offered to go out. We did about 6 weeks opening for Mahavishnu. And we all became really good friends. I'm still close with most of the guys, Jerry Goodman and stuff. But so when Billy called me after we finished the tour, and he said, "Look, I got offered to do a record, and I was wondering if you wanted to do it." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'd love to," which is so frightening, the concept of playing with him because he's such a beast and. Another one of those guys that could shift time, and his comfort zone for all that stuff was amazing.
Yeah, it's tremendous.
But I said I'd love to, and I flew to New York, and we did it at Electric Ladyland, and pretty much all the stuff I did on there, I did everything but 2 songs, and we did it all in 2 days, and done. And it was like, and I walked in, and when I was in the group Wolfgang. Back in the 60s, we were managed by a criminal, and one of the other acts that this criminal had was a group called Zephyr, and Tommy Bolin was the guitarist in Zephyr. So I walked in to do Spectrum, and I look, and there's Tommy Bolin standing there, and I hadn't seen him in a couple of years, and it was probably the best playing he ever did on that record. I mean, every note he plays on that is live. There were no overdubs. There's one song on there where I can point it out when you're listening to it, where he and Jan Hammer are trading licks back and forth, and he breaks his E string right in the middle of a solo. And he just tears the string off and finishes the song, and we moved on. He didn't even go back and punch it in or fix it because he was just a beast. He was such a gifted guitarist. Another cat, losing him was just one of those heartbreaking things because he was so great.
Yeah, I agree. Well, a lot of the work you do requires restraint and service of the tune, but occasionally you do get opportunities to really stretch out and play. And I think that this Spectrum album with Billy Cobham illustrates that point. So we're going to listen to a track you mentioned earlier called Stratus. And in addition to Billy Cobham's powerhouse drumming and your bass playing, as you mentioned, this has Tommy Bolin on guitar and keyboard player Jan Hammer, who also played with Mahavishnu and made substantial contributions to classic Jeff Beck albums like Wired and There and Back. And, of course, He also composed the soundtrack for the iconic 80s television series Miami Vice.
Yep.
So this is from Billy Cobham's 1973 Spectrum album, and it's called Stratus.
Turn it up.
Well, just listening to that makes my hands tired, so I can't even imagine actually playing it. I hope they didn't make you do too many takes.
No, I think, I can't remember. I think we did 2 takes on it. I can't remember if that ended up being 1 or 2.
Yeah.
We didn't exactly overwork ourselves in there. It was really more than anything. It was just once Tommy had gone in a day ahead of time to work on the heads with Jan, just to get all the heads of each song together, and then he had sketched them out for me, so I had some idea what I was looking at once we, at least for each of the songs, had kind of a defining head to it. But for the most part, it was just raw energy that we were going for, and so we didn't waste time, doing tracks over and over. We kind of captured the moment, which I loved.
Well, do you think earlier takes tend to be better when everything's fresh, or are you sometimes taking a while to zero in on a target? Not with this project, but with other projects.
It really runs the gamut. For me, if something's pretty straight up, my best performance is going to be my first or second. Mm-hmm. And if it's all together. But there are times when you've got a lot of stuff to sort out if the arrangement isn't complete, so you put in a lot of... I've had some songs I've done where we've done anywhere from 50 to 100 takes.
Yeah.
But preferably, the real problem I have is after a couple of takes, you find yourself sort of sitting there, and you're looking at the music, and you start to drift off, and you think, isn't it weird how I can look at a dot on a page, and it somehow sends a signal, and then it runs down my arm, and then suddenly you're going, oh Christ, did we play the bridge yet?
Right.
You're lost in the moment.
Yeah.
It becomes more physiological than anything.
The mind wanders.
Yeah, so you got to be careful with that.
But do you happen to remember the most takes you've ever had to do of anything?
I think there was, as I recall, I think we did a lot of takes of a couple things on some early Jackson Browne stuff, mm-hmm. and it was only because the juices in that guy flow like crazy. So even if he thinks he's got something done, he still tweaks on it and works on it. Mm-hmm. So you would be sitting there thinking, we got it, and then he would call you and say a week later, I'm going to do it a little different. Let's mm-hmm. cut it again. And you go in and cut it a bunch more times and stuff. And you may, at the end of the project, go back to the beginning and go with that. But there have been some times where things have really gone on for a long time. But in general, the consensus usually is one of those things where everybody kind of looks around and goes, that was pretty cool. I think that was it. And we don't beat it to death.
That's good. Well, of course, it's impossible to fake good musicianship in the studio because if you can't play, it's pretty obvious to everyone. However, producers are a different story. I know you've worked with many of them who have had varying degrees of ability, and you've even gone so far as to devise some unique gear to help you deal with some of the more clueless ones.
Are you talking about the producer switch?
The producer switch.
Well, there are times I've been in the studio and I'm sitting there and I'm looking next to me and I've got Sir George Martin sitting there and I'm freaking out, going, "Oh man, please don't choke! God, it's him." And there's been a number of producers I've worked with that are really, from Peter Asher to Matt Serletic. There's just a ton of these guys that are really fine musicians and know. But there are those times where you end up with a guy who maybe is there because either he owns the gear or his brother-in-law got him the gig at the label or something. And I would get sometimes asked, to make something shimmer. And that's not in my Hindemith book anywhere. So I finally said, this is really ridiculous at this point. And so what I did was on my main bass that I was using at the time in the studio, I just drilled a hole in the plate and stuck a switch on it, and it had no wires or anything going to it. It was a placebo. But when they would ask for something, I would make sure they saw me flip the switch, and then they were generally really happy with that change.
Oh, my God.
But it got you through. But really, I learned that the whole setup for that came from Tommy Tedesco. He was probably the greatest guitar player the studio ever saw. And I was doing Knight Rider or one of those, because we used to do tons of TV shows.
Yeah.
And when we worked at Universal, they had these baffles set up in front of us to keep all the horns separated from the rhythm section, and just for separation and recording. And I'm sitting there next to Tommy, and the conductor's across the room, and all he can see of us is, it's like Kilroy. All he can see is the top of our faces. And so I remember him sitting there asking Tommy if he brought a mandolin. So Tommy bends over and picks up a mandolin and plays a little bit, and the guy goes, "No, that's not it." And he goes through about a half a dozen instruments he has Tommy trying before he finally hears what he wants to hear. And at this point, I'm crying. I'm just dying next to him because Tommy only had his acoustic guitar with him. He just kept bending over like he was picking something up, but just played in different positions until the guy finally heard what he wanted to hear.
Nice.
And I looked at him. I said, all these years in junior high, high school, and college, I said, I just learned more how this business works in 5 minutes with you than I did in all those years.
Yeah.
And that kind of motivated me into the producer switch, just to have, something. And it's not mean-spirited, because I think I would probably, I don't trust my ears that much. If somebody said, what sounds better, this or this, I might listen and really kind of just go, well, I guess that is, and they could be identical. I don't know, because your mind makes you want to think something's going on.
Right.
But it just expedited some awkward moments just to say, let's just get it done. Let's just let them see me do this, and then we're off and running.
Well, in addition to all of your studio work, you've also done some extensive touring with a variety of artists. After doing so many performances, do you still feel a sense of excitement when you step out onto a stage?
I'll tell you, if somebody came to me and said, you have a choice right now, you can spend the rest of your life doing studio work or touring, I would pick touring.
Oh.
I still prefer it.
Hmm.
There's a magic and an energy about walking out on a stage and playing live. First off, you don't scrutinize anything, because the minute that note leaves you, it's done. Yeah. You can't sit there and disseminate it and pick it apart in the studio endlessly. And when you're playing and you see people's faces responding in a positive way, boy, there's nothing more exciting than that. Mm-hmm. My juices are still completely flowing when I go out and play live.
That makes me think of an analogy with an actor. I mean, if you're an actor who makes films, or if you're an actor who does stage plays,
yeah.
If you do a play, you see the audience reaction, and it's a complete entity. Or if you're making a movie, you never really see the audience reaction unless you sit in the theater later, and it's like you're piecing little pieces together at a time. So,
well, a similar analogy that I always think, too, is it's like the difference between being a mechanic and the race car driver.
There you go.
The studio is the mechanic. You're fine-tuning and developing the car. But after that's over, I'd really like to be behind the wheel and just be going 200 miles an hour.
Yeah. Well, you did a concert with James Taylor and Carole King at the Troubadour in Los Angeles, a venue with great personal significance to both of them. And then when you took that show to the larger venues that their combined star power warranted, an effort was made to recreate the intimacy of a nightclub with the set design. Do you think that was effective?
That was totally effective. It was unbelievably effective. We were really not quite sure how this was going to work, because number one, like you said, having originated at the Troubadour in Hollywood, which was a real intimate little, I don't know how many people that place holds, 400 or something like that. But the thing that was really fascinating was taking it to that arena concept. But the reason it worked was we did an in the round in the center of there, and then we built what was basically like a nightclub right around the perimeter of the stage that was isolated from the rest of the crowd. And those seats, it was like a special thing. I mean, it was a little each. There were these pods, these 3 big pods, and each one had these little tables with a lamp on them that 2 people could sit at, and they could have food and stuff in there. Yeah. So we would look from the stage, and it felt like we were still playing in a club, and and a lot of people, like at first, were going, "Oh man, this is that same old stiff the people," because it was $1,500 a seat for those. But 100% of those seats all went to charity. We raised about $4 million for charity on the tour. Like when we played Nashville, they gave to flood relief, because it was just after the floods in Nashville. Mm. And what those people got along with those seats was they got to come to sound check and sit with us during sound check, hang out afterwards. We signed tons of stuff. They got to come to dinner. Mm-hmm. So it was really neat. It was a really kind of neat situation. Plus, it was a complete tax write-off for them because it was all donation.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea.
It was a great idea where you see some of these people do these kind of things and the people leave with a laminate, and it's like, come on, give them a break. But the thing that was beautiful about the tour was we had 10 really huge high-def screens. So people I talked to that were even up in the nosebleed sections said they saw perfectly, and we had like I forget how many we had, 8 or 10 cameras shoot going the whole time with the whole video team. But it was one of those things. There's that old adage that you can't go home. We actually got to go home, and it was really, as I always say, bitchin'. It was the exact same band we had in 1970, and everybody's still at the top of their game. I mean, the real unusual part of that tour was the fact that we were still in all the original keys from 1970, where most acts at this point have dropped the keys, considerably. But James and Carol were both still singing at the top of their game.
Yeah.
Russ Cooch and I are still working every day, so it's not like you put something together for nostalgia and you pull out the guitar player who's been working at Home Depot now for the past 12 years and hasn't touched a guitar, and he's trying to get back into his spandex again. But
sometimes when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducts some people, you can tell which ones are a little rusty on their instruments.
Exactly. So, but it was fabulous. It was one of those things that it's some of the greatest memories I'll ever have was getting this act back together again and playing those songs again.
And it's such great music and so well recorded and so well performed. I mean, what a delight to be able to dip into those song catalogs, James Taylor and Carole King.
Oh, yeah.
When you put a set list together.
When we sat down to start rehearsing, we had a list of about 80 songs that we all kind of put together, and then had to hone that down into like 28 songs. And boy, I'll tell you, giving any of them up was tough. Every night we would have 2 songs in the set that we would alternate off of, because people really wanted to hear the hits, all the stuff that they loved. So we had those, and then we would leave a couple of slots open where they could pick different songs each night. So people that came back to shows would hear a few different things and stuff.
Make it a little more spontaneous for you guys.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. I loved every second of it.
Well, when you're working with material that's been performed many times, or you've performed many times, is it tempting to try and work out new arrangements to make it more interesting for yourselves, or do you think it's usually better to stick with the familiar versions that the audience knows?
I'm a real spontaneous player. I don't think I've ever played anything twice the same way. As many times as I played Fire and Rain, and as how simple a song that is, I don't think I've ever played it twice the same.
Yeah.
I always look for little other hooks and things. Some songs leave you with far more flexibility, but I know guys that are very analytical players. They think of their parts, and then if they suddenly said, "Well, why don't you double that?" and they just do it. Man, if I had to double a part, I would have to sit there going bar by bar, because I don't think I've ever played 2 bars the same in my life.
Yeah.
I really kind of just I go into a different zone when I play. I start thinking of other things and get into the moment. I don't really think about that performance.
You think you trust your subconscious to play the appropriate things?
It's kind of like lifting the mask and just thinking, "Go with the Force, Luke." I really like that mentality. I really like just going for the moment, and that's, for me, is the best performances.
So you're the Jedi bass player.
Yeah, exactly. I'm more like Chewbacca, but...
Yeah. I don't have any questions about your personal appearance. I know it comes up a lot. Do you have a trademark beard, a reminiscence of I'm ZZ Top, although you probably preceded them?
Well, no, I think we're all about the same ilk, and just like like William Golden from the Oak Ridge Boys and stuff. Right. I think we're just trying to keep the spirit alive.
Well, if I was Dusty, I'd be worried, about losing my gig. Right? I wouldn't be worried about it, but I'd think there is a guy out there who can play bass and could step in and take my job. I better.
I have a great shot of me and Billy Gibbons together, and at one point, Dusty, I think, was cleaning his gun and shot himself in the foot.
Oh no!
And I looked at Billy and I said, "Hey, if Dusty ever shoots himself again, do I pass the audition?"
You're ready-made. You're like the only choice.
Yeah, it would be perfect. But I would, if he ever wanted to quit, I would do that in a second. I love ZZ. But,
yeah, one of the greats.
Yep.
You've done a lot of touring with Lyle Lovett. I understand he's not awfully big on rehearsing.
No rehearsal.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean when there's an expectation when we hit the road that we know the catalog, because when we show up the first day, that sound check is the rehearsal, and every night it's different. And we usually don't know until about 5 or 10 minutes before showtime what the set's going to be that night. And sometimes there's some surprises on that list, and you're scrambling to get out an iPod and try to find that tune and figure it out. It's not an easy gig, but it's an easy gig. And I'll tell you, I've been working with Lyle since the late '80s in the studio, and toured quite a bit with him. And I just enjoy his music so much, and his musicianship. So I'm real proud to be a part of that group. And I give him so much credit for taking the large band on the road, because in a day and age when most people are looking at budgets and pinching pennies, the fact that this guy's willing to take 15 or 16 guys on the road for the summer is pretty astounding.
Well, you can tell when you listen to his albums, and the point you just made, he's a person who deeply cares about the music. Yeah, no, that's everything to him. And then he mixes it up. He's out with John Hyatt now, and they do a two-man show. And then he'll go out and do some stuff with like 4 or 5 guys, and then so he can mix it up really well, so he can cover himself throughout the year, where he'll probably make some really nice dough doing the smaller stuff, and then he uses that to subsidize going out and doing the big summer tour with all the guys. You know, it's so ironic that you mentioned John Hyatt, because I was about to do that myself. The reason is Michael Urbano has been on the show, and he was John Hyatt's drummer for quite a while. So John Hyatt would show up at soundcheck with a brand new song. They'd learn it and then play it at the gig that night. Oh, it gets crazy. That's happened, and we've done that with Lyle. I'll tell you, the funniest time that ever happened to me was with James. We played Queens College in the very beginning, and it was just James, Russ, and myself. And the day we learned to play "You've Got a Friend." And we get up there, we learned it that afternoon, so we get up to play it that night, and James tells the crowd, he goes, "This is a brand new song we've just learned, so if you hear any mistakes, it's Lee." And so everybody's chuckling. Well, we play the song, and every bass note's wrong. And when it was all through, I looked over at him, and he's got kind of this look on his face, and the crowd's kind of just sitting there looking at us. And I said, "Hey, James, what song did we play before You Got a Friend? Was it Country Road in drop D tuning? Did you remember to tune your E string back up to an E from the D?" And he had totally forgotten. So his thumb was a whole step off for the whole song. So, I mean, we were just clashing. It was just one of those funny moments, but I thought, man, I can't take a bullet on this one. No. This is not right. Well, in addition to working with so many dominant artists of the 70s, you've also worked with dominant 80s artists like Phil Collins. You played on his No Jacket Required solo album, which won an Album of the Year Grammy in 1985. Even though you weren't on his previous solo albums, one nice thing about touring with an artist is you get a chance to perform some of the earlier material that you might not have played on originally. You know, Phil Collins is a great drummer, great singer, great songwriter. How did you hook up with him? Actually, the first time, we were both aware of each other, but the first time I think we actually played was on a Lee Ritenour record. And Lee had called me to play, and he had Phil coming in, and so we kind of hooked up on that session. And he asked me to do his Face Value tour, but I was at that point I was already committed to James Taylor, so I couldn't do it. But I said, well, you know, I'd love to work with you. So, you know, down the pike, if anything comes up, you know, give me a shout. And that's when he called me in '84 and said, you know, I want to go in the studio. And I went over to London, and we did the No Jacket Required album, and then toured that. And then in '89 we did the But Serious album, and went out for almost a year touring that one. And then after that, he and we kind of parted ways in the '90s, and then he called me back and asked me if I would start working with him again in 2000, and that's when we did the final farewell tour and all that. Well, I'm going to play a live recording. This is a case where you also played on the studio version. Since I want our listeners to experience the same moment of recognition that the live audience does. I'm not going to say the name of the song. I'm just going to play it.
Great.